Hi, everybody. Welcome to this latest episode of Real Talk with Rick. Today, I bring in our city's Housing and Community Services Manager, Jonathan Stanley. Jonathan has worked for the city for a number of years now on, obviously, the title implies a lot of different housing projects, and he's going to talk a lot about that. He's going to talk about some of the work he's done in Eden Prairie with housing, and also a little bit about his background, kind of the work he did, mainly again in housing at the state level, at the regional level, and a few other states and countries actually that he worked in. So we get to hear a little bit about his background that led him to Eden Prairie, and a little bit about housing projects today in Eden Prairie. And then we can kind of wrap up a little bit with his passion for music, playing music, listening to music, and just on the spur of the moment, at the end of the podcast, I asked if he would submit some of his material, some of his original music material that we could close out the podcast with. So we were able to get a hold of a copy of a 15-year-old plus recorded song from band he was in. I think it was probably written 30-some years ago, but recorded at least 15 years ago. And so at the end of the podcast, you're going to get to hear a piece of music from his band. He didn't say this at the time, but the song you're going to hear is his original song with his group, American Cheese, called My Silly Sparks. But first, before you hear that piece of music, you can listen to my conversation with Jonathan Stanley. All right, I'd like to welcome Jonathan Stanley, Eden Prairie's Housing and Community Services Manager. Jonathan, thank you for stopping in to talk with us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
All right, it's good to have you here. Yeah, your predecessor, she was a previous podcast a while back, but it's going to be nice to have you in here and talk about what you have been up to and what Eden Prairie's been up to in housing and community services. We'll talk about that, but before we get to that, I would like to know where you're from.
I grew up on Weaver Lake in Maple Grove, Minnesota. Grew up there at a time when we were the third house on the lake, actually. It was really idyllic, gravel roads, salamanders, muskrats running all about. It was a really nice place to grow up right on the lake.
And then what happened?
Well, eventually you move out. And
No, not to you, but to Maple Grove. What happened? Because the idyllic vision of Maple Grove with the salamanders and what'd you say, muskrats and raccoons?
Yep.
And
well, eventually, obviously, the town grew up, and it's quite a different place these days. Not for better or worse necessarily, but progress happens. So
No, I agree. I'm not trying to bait you into anything. If we were talking about Edina, absolutely, we would go down a different path. But no, I'm a fan of Maple Grove. There's quite a few people I know that currently live there, grew up there. So that's great. So where'd you get your education after Maple Grove?
Well, I studied urban studies at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. From there, I went to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And then some years down the line, after gaining some professional experience, I attended the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. Excuse me.
Let's pause there for a second. University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
that's Ivy League.
It is the Ivy
League. We got an Ivy Leaguer here. I had to pause. I think I know all the Ivy League schools, but you don't often think of Penn, but that's one of them.
It is founded by Ben Franklin, none other than Ben Franklin.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, we would have nothing less than an Ivy Leaguer in your position. So then, what you mentioned, Singapore?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was for additional schooling following Philadelphia.
Not after Philadelphia. After Philadelphia, I took a job with the city of New York, actually. Worked there for a couple of years. And then after returning to Minnesota and working for the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency for several years, I became aware of a master's program for sort of executive level folks in Singapore. And it turned out to be a free master's degree. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about living in New York.
I absolutely adored living in New York. I lived in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which, if anybody has seen the movie Saturday Night Fever, there's a famous scene where a gentleman walks out onto a bridge. That's the Verrazano Narrows that connects Brooklyn to Staten Island. So that was sort of
a gentleman being John Travolta.
actually, I think it's a secondary
person?
character.
Okay,
I'm not
okay,
quite
sorry.
sure. It's been a while.
I'm thinking of The Strut. I'm thinking when he did The Strut.
Right.
All right, sorry.
Probably filmed in Bay Ridge. Yeah.
Okay.
And I worked in Lower Manhattan, worked some on the redevelopment of Lower Manhattan after 9/11. I worked on housing projects across all 5 boroughs. It was really thrilling.
Wow. Yeah, both living and working there, and that was, I didn't really ask you about the timeline, but that was just right after?
Not right after. It was about 2005, 2006, but there
Okay.
was still a lot of funding related to the redevelopment of Lower Manhattan flowing through the governments and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And then did you then commute? Did you have to commute into work then? Did you come in on the train from Brooklyn into, I don't know if it is Lower Manhattan, where
Yep.
City Hall is? Or,
Yep, City Hall
yeah.
is there, and the Housing Preservation and Development Department, which is where I worked. I did commute on the R train, which is one of the more hated trains in New York City. It took me about an hour by train, door to door, and so I learned to commute like a champion then.
Yeah, that's great. And then to Singapore
Right on.
later on. And what's life like in Singapore? What are
Singapore,
a few examples or anecdotes from Singapore?
well, they say there are 2 national hobbies in Singapore, shopping and eating. The food there cannot be beat, both in terms of all the regular type of international staples, but then this own unique form of food that's sort of Singapore street food. While I was in school there, I studied with people from 26 different countries, which was amazing. When you have that much diversity in thought and experience and differences between nations and whatnot, you end up realizing that the basic bottom line is everything's contextual. So it's kind of hard to compare policies across, a nation of 5 million people in Singapore's case to India, for example.
Wow.
But it was really eye-opening and enlightening, just having all that cultural experience.
How long were you there?
I was there for 17 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you been back, or would you go back?
I would absolutely go back. Actually, I'm still dating a woman who lives in Singapore.
Okay.
A native Singaporean.
Okay.
So
But you haven't been back there to visit her?
she has made a habit of coming here a lot more than I've made a habit of going there, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. No. That's interesting. So then, what brings you then back to Minnesota? Because Maple Grove in New York, Philadelphia, Singapore. What brings you back here?
Yeah. It was actually a very difficult time to be an expatriate looking for work in Singapore. The country had gone through sort of some foment regarding hiring of expats in government in particular and in the private sector. So it was a very difficult time to be looking for work there. And after, a period of time, I frankly needed to earn some money. So came back home to Minnesota and took up with the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, which is essentially like the state's affordable housing bank.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about your work there. Was that, kind of self-described there, what you said, the state's affordable housing bank, but what were some of the projects that you worked on?
So I had 2 tours of duty there, one in the single-family division and one in the multifamily division. On the single-family side, I worked on a rehabilitation program for extremely low-income households, worked on first-time homebuyer programs, things of that nature. And then in the multifamily division, I managed federal home funds for them, also a newer source of funding from the state legislature called housing infrastructure bonds. And these were funds that were contributed basically as gap financing into multifamily development projects and some rehabilitation projects as well.
Okay. And then prior to coming to Eden Prairie, you had one more stop.
I did, at the Metropolitan Council. I was fortunately there to be there at an interesting time when they were creating their first housing-focused policy document in 30 years, which became the 2040 Housing Policy Plan. So I essentially co-authored that document and then did some work for them also in terms of reviewing development projects that were coming in for funding from the council and things of that nature.
And then in terms of the 2040 housing development plan, that would be what housing looks like or will look like in the entire 7-county metro area out to 2040. So you would be taking in all kinds of detail from all of the communities in the 7-county metro area, and at a macro level, having a housing plan for the whole region?
That's right.
Okay.
I think sort of by nature it has to be at a fairly macro level, but it covered financing strategies, policy strategies, just had a variety of different approaches for cities to consider in trying to develop decent, safe, and affordable housing.
And do you remember, it's probably a few years back, but do you remember what some of the takeaways are from that plan? Is it a matter of how much more growth in housing will be moving out into the exurban areas, the need for redevelopment, the need for maybe more density? What were some things that you remember in that plan that were some key points?
Well, you definitely hit on a couple of main ones: redevelopment opportunities, the need to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, which is older housing, of a Class B or Class C type, that maybe, naturally, the rents are naturally affordable via its condition and age. Certainly there were appeals to the legislature and to the federal government to look for more financial resources for cities to use. And then there is an allocation of affordable housing need that's allocated to all 187 municipalities in the 7-county metro. And so you were really, devising strategies for the smallest of communities in the region to all the way up to, the Twin Cities themselves. So.
Yeah. So then I mentioned earlier Molly, your predecessor, was a previous podcast guest, and that was actually after she retired, but her retirement created an opening for this position. What attracted you to the position here that you occupy now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've always, it's sort of a little phrase that stuck with me over time, but I always wanted to run a little housing shop. And by that I mean that I just wanted to, work with whatever funding was available, advocate for certain policies in a community, work on new development projects and preservation projects alike. And this position not only offered that, but it also had a community services component to it, where I hadn't done a lot of work, but that was also an attractive part of the appeal. Once I got into the interview process with the city, I just had a really good feeling about the culture and the sort of person-to-person approach of the city.
Did you? Yeah, so you talked about the community services piece, but would be newer to you because obviously the background you have that we just talked about is just housing, and obviously that's a huge part of this position. We'll talk about that with the task force that you worked with and the report that came out. But tell us about the division then, as it sits now. The division that you manage, what does that look like?
Yeah, so some of the functions that we do is working on policies that the city might consider adopting that pertain to affordable housing. Working and negotiating with developers on affordability in their positions or in their various developments. We do a lot of liaising with property owners and tenants who might be having some type of dispute or problem with their units. We also do a number of grant funding activities, funding nonprofits in the area such as Prop Shop, Meals on Wheels, Relate is a new one that we're bringing on board. So we have some city funds and then some federal funds that we use to help support those nonprofits that do a wide variety of social service activities.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of funding we get from other sources, the federal government, the community development block grant dollars. So there's quite a bit of money that you're managing that comes to us that must be targeted to those of low to moderate income, which can, again, be done through grants we give to other agencies like Prop that then provide the dollars to those in need, to us managing our own programs, such as the first-time home buyer, the housing rehab.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, are there does it jump out to you any recent examples of successes in those areas?
Well, I think we have, a pretty smooth running machine as far as those programs go. We've had a long history of administering them. I feel great anytime we can provide a home rehab loan to a lower moderate income household. We also work with a community land trust, and that's we're only able to do about 1 or 2 properties per year, but that's housing program type where the cost of the land is basically taken out of the equation of home buying, making the home much more affordable to the low-income household. So we work with a partner called West Hennepin Affordable Housing Land Trust on that initiative.
Yeah, and I alluded to earlier that one of the big projects that you worked on was with our housing task force. And I think it was in 2019, our city council had a very, very strong desire to really dive into the housing issue to a point that they appointed a task force of 13 people that you were the staff liaison and contact for to help put a plan together over the course of a year and a half that would address the variety of housing issues in Eden Prairie, and which was ultimately adopted and now being implemented. So do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we had a very diverse group. We took some applications from folks that had interest in the housing task force. Some of them had significant experience in housing, and some really had none. So a big first part of the effort was to educate the task force on the city programs that do exist, the areas that we may have been contemplating getting into on our own, and what our peer cities are doing, things of that nature, to really start to get a handle on opportunity areas that we might pursue. In the end, they came up with a set of recommendations that was fairly long and will give us, some grist to work on for quite a while. One thing that has come to fruition from that process is the city has adopted an inclusionary housing ordinance, which is in essence is a policy or an ordinance that requires that every new multifamily development have some affordability built into it. So there's one very palpable example of the task force's success.
Yeah, and as you know, almost every multifamily housing project, maybe with the exception of 1 or 2 that have been built in the last 25 years, all have an affordability component, and that's typically been negotiated during the process of approval, but now it's spelled out and very clear ahead of time what's expected. Also, what I think is interesting though is there's quite a bit your office does, and quite a bit that the task force talked about with tenant protection and tenant landlord issues. And we do have, and we've had a couple different guests on here that talk about keeping our housing stock up through rental licensing and inspections. But there was some work that you talked about there regarding the renters in our community and the need to be an advocate for them.
Absolutely. Some of that relates back to that naturally occurring affordable housing that I mentioned. There's been a trend really nationwide and definitely acutely here in the metro area of national or even international capital interests coming in and purchasing these properties that have aged a little bit. They put what we sometimes refer to as lipstick on them, make modest improvements to them, and then raise the rent significantly. So tenant protection ordinances really, look to protect the tenant in that process. If somebody can't afford their new rent, do they have supports, for example, to find a new home? Are they being treated fairly in the process by those new owners of those properties? So that's something that we're still contemplating and considering. Several communities in the area have adopted tenant protection ordinances. But yeah, that was another recommendation that the city take a hard look at that.
Yes, and also possibly starting a trust fund, which I think we're going to do. And we do have dollars that are set aside to use for housing, but a trust fund may allow us to get grants and dollars from foundations to be set aside for housing projects. So that's probably coming up.
That's something I'd be very excited about. The models that we've seen out there spell out a number of different financial sources, as Rick said, that where money can come from, and then they spell out a number of different potential uses for those funds. One exciting thing is that the Minnesota legislature just allocated $1 million to be distributed to communities that either have or are contemplating creating an affordable housing trust fund. So that may be an opportunity to get some of those matching funds.
Good, good. Are there any other so that a lot of that work is being done now. Some of the work has already been done of the task force. What are some of the other projects you're working on right now?
Well, right now we have a kind of a slew of multifamily projects that have come in for approvals in the city. So Paravel is an exciting project that has gone through the approval process and is expected to break ground shortly. That's being undertaken by Timberland Partners, who did the Elevate project at Southwest Station. It's a somewhat luxury, high amenity community. But again, through our negotiations, we're going to have 20% of the units affordable to households at or below 50% of the area median income. And then some units also at the 80% and 100% level, keeping some of those units affordable for lower and moderate income families. It was very exciting when I first came on board that we were in the midst of working on Trail Point Ridge, which is a 58-unit development by Common Bond, which is one of the most respected and active nonprofit builders in the Midwest area. That project has some deeply affordable units in it that we aren't able to afford to engineer into projects. And then we do have a project kind of adjacent to that. Trail Point Ridge was part of a larger development called Smith Village, which also included some senior condominiums. And now the same developer, United Properties, is proposing a 239-unit property called the Ellie. It was a assemblage of 7 single-family home sites that they're planning to convert into a multifamily building. And again, on that one, we would have some good affordability built in via the new ordinance.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and I mentioned this at a few different meetings I was at, that here we are, it's November 2021, and everything we've been reading in the paper and different business journals or housing journals is that there's just a shortage of all types of housing, like everything, up to the higher end single family home, to the affordable single family home, to the affordable apartment, to the market rate apartment. So I think, and I know this from other cities as well, is that there's just a desire to build out as much as possible and find, those different sites you mentioned, these aren't huge pieces of raw land. They're areas that are infill or, parcels that need to be redeveloped. So I think we're seeing a lot of that right now.
We are, and when you speak of the shortage, there was a Star Tribune article recently published that actually identified the Twin Cities as having the most severe housing shortage in the country. So we often think of places like San Francisco or New York when we think about housing availability, pricing, and things of that nature. But we do definitely have a problem on our hands here, too, when we look at the growth that's expected for the region, maintaining economic competitiveness, et cetera. We really do need to have quality options for people of all different income levels.
Right. So yeah, you're gonna be busy for a while.
Plenty of work.
You're gonna be busy for a while. So what would you say, Jonathan's probably the favorite part of your job?
Well, I'm really attracted to new development. So I get a thrill when contemplating development proposals, designs, working with the developers and trying to obviously coax out as much affordability as we might be able to. So I'd say that the new construction pieces are probably my favorite part. What's been a real pleasant surprise to me has been working on the community services aspects. That you can see the results of the work very directly. So you build a new apartment building, you may or may not see, a happy family that moves in there, after the building is opened. But on the human services side, we're able to kind of quantitatively and qualitatively see the outcomes of some of our efforts, in providing food, providing various, clothing and things like that to people in need.
Yeah, that's nice. What's challenging for you? What's one of the more difficult aspects?
Well, Development is difficult, and you basically have kind of a three-part question when it comes to affordable housing. You can either sacrifice the quality or design of the project. You can ask the developer to accept a rate of return that's too low for them to even have interest in the project, or there has to be some government intervention into the project to help make it financially feasible. It's difficult because those resources, unfortunately, from the federal level have been decreasing steadily over decades. Our state does a good job of trying to provide some supplementary funding from the state level, but funding always remains the challenge, to make sure that the housing is of a really respectable quality and virtually indistinguishable from other housing built, just in the market rate system.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing, and we've had council members that bring this up, is when you have affordable units in some of these really beautiful projects that we have, it's not as if the apartment that is the affordable unit, quote unquote, is that different on the same floor. If it's the same, obviously, type of unit, I mean, there's different 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom,
Sure.
But a 2 bedroom apartment in Elevate, for instance, is no different than the 2 bedroom unit that's market or affordable. It's the same thing. So the bottom line is somebody has to pay for that.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's the difficult part, because that's where, as you said, there are trade-offs. I mean, cities provide some flexibility too in the development process to be able to make that happen, even if it doesn't involve dollars. But yeah, that's challenging. You're right. Yeah. So so you do your office and the work you and your group does is not here at City Hall. Where can people find you?
Yeah, it's a pretty unique arrangement. We're actually housed in the lower level, which we sometimes joke about as the boutique level of the Eden Prairie Center. Just us and the city or the mall management are on that level. But it's the Office of Housing and Community Services, and we're available most anytime.
Yeah, no, that's it's kind of one of those places I know where we have been given free space over the years, and it's kind of meant to have people be able to come and go without maybe that feeling too of walking into a city building or a certain facility if they're looking for like very sensitive social services as well.
That's a great point. We get a lot of foot traffic, and it is exactly some of those types of situations where people are cautious or nervous about reaching out to the government agencies involved, and we help try to partner folks with resources not just from the city but through the county and other social service providers, et cetera. So,
when you're not working, what else do you like to do?
Well, I am a huge music buff. I absolutely adore music and all things musical. I'm also a very avid guitarist, guitar collector, I'd say. I'd say a fix-it man for guitars, ultimately a guitar salesman. It's a pretty expensive habit, but I would estimate I've probably owned about 275 guitars in my life. Currently, I own about 15 of the top sweethearts. So I love music and guitars. I also love to travel. So those are a couple of the main ones. Yeah,
let's break it down a little
Sure.
bit. So, yeah, and the part about I'll talk about the music in terms of playing and listening to it. I'm not well versed in the gear per se, personally. So you'll have to educate me. But if you just have a lot. You have the 15 guitars, but you have a lot of guitars that come and go. When you say like sales, is it a matter of like the hobby is like buying guitars and then reselling them and making money? Or maybe playing around with them or fixing guitars that need work, or what is that? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a little bit of all of that. There's a thrill of coming home and seeing that there's a new guitar there. So part of it is just that thrill.
Yeah.
Sometimes the guitars are in need of some work. Sometimes they're ready to go. So that varies. A variety of things attract me to them, whether it's different tonalities that I expect the guitar to have, different equipment that they might have on them. Sometimes it's looks. Could be a variety of things, but yeah.
Where do you find them?
I buy them mostly online, actually, which,
Okay.
there's two schools of thought. One is you got to go into a shop and you got to play the actual instrument. And you got to, make sure that you vibe with it. I've had tremendous success buying straight off the internet. And, I've hit a couple clunkers in my day. There's no doubt about it. But overall, I've had really good success.
What's the most you paid for one guitar?
Sensitive area.
I know. I knew it would be.
The price points generally seem to creep up as you get more and more involved in the hobby, but I guess the most that I paid is about $3,500.
Oh, okay. I mean, not that that's nothing, but I mean, you hear about, and these are maybe more actual, very, very well-known celebrity musicians that you hear more about, like guitars in the six figures.
Oh yeah, those definitely exist, but
And older guitars. So again, most of what you buy, these are some of them from the 50s, 60s, and 70s? Are they typical?
Most of them are the 80s or newer.
Okay.
And when you talk about the six-figure instruments, you are talking about rarity, and that's the name of the game. So either somebody famous played it, tried to light it on fire.
Sure.
I once played a $27,000 SG, a Gibson SG, in a guitar shop in Chicago. Had no intention of buying it and made that very clear that I couldn't afford the instrument. What was interesting about it was that this was a guitar from the early '60s, played absolutely terribly. I mean, it was just not a fun instrument to play at all.
Right.
But it's just how many of them were made and how many of them survive and how many of them are up for sale.
Yeah. So for you, it isn't a collectible and something that will appreciate and value as much as like I actually want to play it and use it and enjoy it and get a feel for it.
I play them all, yeah.
Yeah.
If I own it, I want to play it.
Okay, playing then. So you've played in bands?
I have played in bands, actually just one band that had a few different incarnations.
Okay.
We were called American Cheese at first, and we went under that moniker for about 10 years. And then we became Freedom Sack after that. We played kind of a pop punk type style, so kind of a melodic, kind of driving melodic type sound. Kind of hard to characterize, but
Sure, but mostly original music?
all original.
All
music.
original music.
Had a lot to say in my my late teens, and my
In
early
your late
20s.
teens? No, absolutely. And did you get like gigs in neighborhoods or were you able to play in front of audiences?
We like to joke that we were the greatest band in the greater Maple Grove metropolitan area. But we did play a number of gigs downtown at various seedy joints. We actually played on the very last night of a nightclub, and we like to joke in that case that we shut that sucker
You shut
down.
that place down.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so you would get some gigs in some of the downtown nightclubs.
Yep. And we were happy if we got, enough money to buy a fruit pie afterwards or a bottle of soda.
Yeah. Yeah, because you were too young to buy a beer.
Well, that's right.
What was the name of the place you closed down?
I think it was called McCluskey's or something of that nature.
That's all right. Yeah, I didn't know. Maybe there might be somebody out here listening.
Could be.
Who was there that night?
Yeah.
In 1980 something.
Probably more like early 1990s.
Early 90s.
Would be the heyday.
Okay. And then, so what you listen to? What do you like to listen to then?
Yeah, I like most styles. Everything from punk to classic to soul to jazz. Some of my favorites are David Bowie. I really love a band called The Descendants. Some of the bands like The Clash. So it's quite a wide variety, but really I like the stuff that is kind of fast, kind of loud, but still melodic.
Sure. Were you able to ever see David Bowie in concert?
Unfortunately. Oh, actually I did.
You did? Yeah.
I almost forgot about it. It
Yeah.
was one of his less well thought of tours, but it was the Glass Spider tour, but I did see him live once, yeah.
Okay, sure. What about the Clash? Because they're actually still around, I think.
No, they've been
No?
gone quite some time.
Are they?
Yeah.
Joe Strummer was
Joe
the
Strummer.
but okay.
And Joe's left us,
He-
unfortunately.
yeah, so they're not around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My brother had the pleasure of seeing them once.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you still able to go? So no, you don't play with a band anymore then?
I don't, but I
Okay.
play guitar every single day.
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive. So what do you have any desire maybe to get with somebody or a group of people and play again, even though you play every day? Or are you just happy just to play by yourself?
The feeling comes and goes. The one regret I have about not playing in a band is that when you're playing, in a cohesive unit, and particularly if you're playing in front of a large number of people, there's a certain feeling there when you're kind of letting it all hang out, with your words and with your music, that I couldn't liken to anything else. And I really, really miss that feeling.
Is there anything else, Jonathan, before we wrap up that you want to mention about your position or the city, or maybe what you see ahead at all, what you see coming up?
Well, the struggle for good quality, affordable housing is with us to stay. Like I said, the federal funds and state funds, they ebb and they flow, programs come and they go. I guess I would just encourage anybody out there who might have a negative view of the term affordable housing or public housing to really stop and think about, the types of folks that might inhabit those homes. They're hardworking families. They're all working families under all of our major programs. And, it's essential that if we want to have vibrant, well-knit communities, that there be opportunities for people who work in a community to also live in that community, enjoy this, maybe good quality schools and parks and things like that, like we have here in Eden Prairie.
Well, good. That's wise advice. So thank you, Jonathan, and it was great having you on today. I appreciate you coming in.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now we'll close with some of your guitar music.
Let it dance
Bye.